everyone, we are finally back with the next installment of my Nancy Drew No Spoiler Reviews video series. As you guys know, I have completed the first 56 books, which are considered the original mysteries of Nancy Drew, and once I have finished that, I just wanted to give myself a little bit of a break. I had originally, when I started out, I had a pretty good head start on all of that as far as uploading and reading and all that, and as I progressed through the series, I kind of got farther and farther behind on my schedule. So near the end of the first 56 books, I was really kind of like pushing myself to really stay on track with those reviews. So I really just wanted to give myself a bit of a break this summer and kind of give myself time to relax and breathe and not put so much pressure on myself. So you guys know that I have kind of taken a little bit of a break off from the no spoiler reviews, but there definitely hasn't been any loss of Nancy Drew content on my channel, because you guys know I have been doing all kinds of different Nancy Drew related videos as far as categorizing the books, doing the book map, and doing the locations and all that kind of thing. So I really hope that you guys have been enjoying those, not specific book reviews, but more of like kind of just interesting topics on the lines of Nancy Drew that I thought you guys would enjoy. So I definitely want to sprinkle some more of those kind of style videos in, also to just kind of break up the monotony and the stress of reading so many books back to back to back. So I really hope that you guys have been enjoying those videos, but we are finally back with the next group of Nancy Drew books. So one little simple change that I played with at the end of the last few videos that I did from the No Spoiler Review series, I decided to go from 5 books to 3 books per video, because number one, I feel like I can talk a little bit more about the books again in a no spoiler fashion, just telling you like any interesting tidbits I found out, or if there were any things that we were tracking throughout the series. It kind of gave me a little bit more time to talk about those things without having like an hour-long video. And I think it also makes it a little bit more manageable as far as for me when it comes to filming the reviews and all that kind of thing. So I have decided I will keep the 3-book block kind of format moving forward throughout the series. So really it actually kind of works out in your favor if you enjoy these videos, because you're just gonna get more videos than you would in the original 5-book format. So nothing to sweat there. If you do enjoy these videos, you'll just be seeing them a little bit more frequently. And another thing I'm gonna try out for this video in particular to see if it helps me with my process or not is I'm actually, instead of just reading the 3 books and then sitting down and reviewing each one, I'm going to try to film this in different segments per book. That way I can read a book, sit down and review it, and then move on to the next one, read it, review it, and then put all of that together into this video. I feel like it might help with the books being a little bit more fresh on my mind, as like with the last one, whenever I was doing the 5-book series, you know, once I get to that 5th book, it had been several weeks since I had read that first book in the block. So this, I think, might be a better method for me. And actually, for once, this one, I don't know if this is a good idea or not. I didn't really come up with like a whole printed out list of all my thoughts and all my key points, and I'm kind of just going to be talking about this off the cuff. Now, I do have like some notes on my phone that I will be refreshing my mind and stuff on certain plot points or ideas or thoughts, whatever it may be. But I didn't do a super structured outline like I did for all of the 56 books. So we will see if this works out for me or not. So starting off for the first book in this block, this is number 57, and this one is called The Triple Hoax. And this book was published in 1979. And this is also the first book with a new publishing company, so this is actually not considered one of the original Nancy Drew books, but they did do a reprinting of this in 2005 in the style of the yellow flashlight book. So there will be just a handful more of books in this format, but moving on forward, we're gonna get into the paperback books coming up very soon. So the summary for this one reads: Aunt Eloise Drew invites Nancy, Bess, and George to New York to help a friend who has been swindled out of sizable sum of money. There the girls see a performance of the Hoaxsters, a magicians group who stun their audiences by clever sleight of hand tricks. Because the magicians temporarily remove people's wallets and handbags, Nancy feels the actors aren't above suspicion. Her hunch is borne out and a whirlwind chase ensues. Nancy, Bess, and George track the Hoaxsters to Mexico City, where Nancy is asked to help find a kidnapped child. The young sleuths follow a lead to Los Angeles, where danger confronts them at every turn. Their enemies resort to theft, even arson, to scare them off the case. With courage and clever deduction, however, Nancy and her friends outmaneuver their cunning adversaries, and after solving the puzzle of the Triple Hoax, bring them to justice. Alright guys, so the first noticeable difference in this one compared to all of the last 56 books, the very first thing I noticed is, of course, that the illustration pages are very, very different. In book 1 through 56, the illustrations were like that pen and ink style, very kind of like cartoonish in my opinion, and I actually really did like that art style. I felt like it was very nostalgic for me, but we do have a shift in what these pages look like. Now we have much more fully like rendered kind of drawings and illustrations, shading, all that kind of thing. Here is another example of what the illustrations look like. So that was the first like biggest shift that I noticed that felt like noticeably different compared to the first 56 books. So moving forward, I do believe all the illustrations are going to be in this kind of more fully rendered kind of style. And one other stylistic kind of thing that I did really notice kind of off the bat, in my opinion, the book feels thicker, but when I look at the page count of this, it actually still really is about 175 to about 185 pages. The books do vary a little bit, but around that 180 mark. It is still hitting at 184, but for some reason the book just kind of felt a little thicker than the other ones. I don't know if that just came down to like the type size, which does feel slightly bigger in the book, which I do enjoy. It's a little easier to read. But another stylistic choice that I did kind of notice more in the writing, although I think that there's not this huge abrupt change in writing style from book 56 to book 57, I did notice it seems that there is a lot more dialogue in this book compared to the last 56 books, which on one hand I actually kind of like because it feels a little bit more natural. I feel like a lot of the story in the original 56 relied heavily on third person narration, whereas this one we kind of learn a little bit more through dialogue throughout the series, so I kind of enjoyed that a lot. And that was just something that I noticed. Instead of having like these large blocks of just narration and description, we kind of learn more through actual dialogue from character to character. And one little quick note, in my categorizing Nancy Drew books, one of the categories that I was going to include in that series, but I ended up cutting it, was all the books that included Aunt Eloise. That might be a category I bring back in a future categorized books, but this was another one where we do have an appearance of Aunt Eloise. So it starts out that the girls are going to visit Nancy's Aunt Eloise to help her friend figure out what happened with like a vacation swindle that she got all kind of wrapped up in. So this is another one that's very heavy on like the kind of fraud type of crime storyline. And you guys know the everlasting question I have with the Nancy Drew series is, where the heck is River Heights? And you guys know that the two kind of prevailing theories that I have read, typically either River Heights is supposed to be like around the Chicago area, and then another prevailing theory is that it's somewhere like in the New Jersey-ish areas. So there's definitely like a few little nuggets in this story that I thought were very interesting that kind of lean one way or another. So the first thing that I noticed was that it mentions that the girls are going to LaGuardia Airport in New York, which led me to think it would make more sense that River Heights was more towards like the Chicago area if they are flying to New York Airport, because I feel like if they were in New Jersey, it could be like not that far away and wouldn't necessarily need to fly. A little bit of a flimsy one, so for me it seemed like it made more sense it would be like the Chicago area, but we will get back to that later. So one of the big kind of things in the story is about the Hoaxsters, and the girls go to several of their magic shows to try to figure out what's going on. And of course, like I said in the summary, one of the things that they do is they do these sleight of hand tricks. Will take people's wallets or their handbags or whatever it may be, but they don't give them back right away. So Nancy immediately becomes become suspicious of this, and that's kind of like her leading theory throughout the whole series of how these crooks are accomplishing their schemes. So one little non-spoilery thing that I wanted to point out, which I think was like a little bit of a hint to the last book, which was the Mystery of the 13th Pearl, or just the 13th Pearl, I think is what it is called. So at one point, Nancy and her friends are going to Aunt Eloise's friend's house to kind of help solve her part of the mystery, and they're explaining how she's like a very rich to-do kind of woman, and she has like different themes throughout her house. Like each room is like a different country kind of theme. And so they go into one of the rooms, which is inspired by Japan and Japanese culture and artwork and things like that. So for me, that was immediately like, oh, I think that's like a little bit of a callback to the last mystery, with it just taking place in Japan in the 13th Pearl. So I thought that was a cute little tip off to the previous story. And one little side plot that they kept kind of like bringing up throughout this mystery is they would stress a lot that the girls are not professional detectives and they're amateur detectives, and they can't accept any money for their services. So that was one thing that they kept kind of like pushing throughout this story, that kind of going off in my brain. I'm like, why do they keep like really stressing this point? But I guess it kind of ties into a little bit of a plot point, which I will not spoil. So throughout the case, Nancy and the girls are kind of popping all around, and they do end up in Mexico. And of course, Nancy just miraculously speaks Spanish flawlessly, which really serves her when they are in Mexico City. Even though we know that in past books, it was mentioned that Nancy didn't know Spanish, and then like in the Forgotten City, all of a sudden she's like a Spanish expert once again. And it's kind of funny because Nancy actually tells the girls that they really should learn the language because it's not difficult. And then it said that Nancy is right, and it's more important for Americans to start learning language of their neighbors. So I thought that was like a little interesting kind of like little call out to the reader almost throughout the book, which they don't really do that often, but this one I definitely kind of felt like they were like, hey, we should all start learning Spanish, which I thought was an interesting little thing to include. Of course, as always, keeping with the traditional style of the Nancy Drew writing, we of course have George just fat shaming. They go like dress shopping, and George just makes some very nasty remarks to her. She even turns to the shop owner and she asks her, do you carry chubby sizes? George is just such a bitch, you guys. That is one thing that did not change so far, is that George is still a fat shaming bitch. Once again, we have a whole lot of like very thinly veiled kind of clues, and Nancy just uncovering personal information that people freely give her, which we are not new to at all. But there was this weird plot line where the girls are in Mexico City and they need to get to Los Angeles, but just so happens there is like an airstrike that they think that is going to happen, and they won't be able to fly out of Mexico for like a month. But don't worry, it just so happens that not only do they just rent a car, but they rent it from someone who left their car in Mexico City, but they live in Los Angeles, which just so happens to be where they're going. And I get that they were trying to like facilitate a specific plot line in this way, but I just feel like, why do they choose these like totally random, out of the blue, like super unrealistic plot lines to further that, when they could have just like taken a Greyhound bus across the country, which could have achieved the same thing but would have been a lot more realistic in my opinion. Once again, we have another fat shaming comment from George, who says that Bess has a 40-inch waist, which Bess vehemently denies. Now, one big clue that I came across when I was reading this, and this kind of just like went off in my brain like ding ding ding, like this is a really big clue at the location of River Heights. So once the girls have made it to their last location, which is Los Angeles, they mentioned that it is 11 o'clock p.m. and they are wanting to call back home to River Heights to touch base with family and stuff. And one of the girls, I think it's George, she mentions that it's 11 o'clock here, which makes it 2 a.m. in River Heights. Now, if you are familiar, that would put River Heights in the Eastern time zone, which means that River Heights couldn't be in Chicago or around Chicago because Chicago is the central time zone. So I feel like that is a really big clue that River Heights is supposed to take place on the East Coast somewhere. So that is another huge point of River Heights actually being on the East Coast or New Jersey or anywhere really at this point. So I thought that was a pretty big clue that I picked up that kind of pretty distinctly would rule out Chicago. This next little thing that I picked up on, my jaw dropped once again because I was so sure we were done with this little plot point or reoccurrence. You guys know that I like to track things that always occur throughout the Nancy Drew series, and one of them was actually a character name that we have seen time and time again. For 3 times we have found there to be a character with the name Horace. You guys, I could not believe it. We have a 4th Horace. A 4th one. I was so sure it was not going to happen again after the 3rd, but we have a 4th Horace. I put in my notes, I said, y'all, I am screaming. She says her name is Horace Brown. That's the 4th Horace that has been used throughout the series. I am flabbergasted. So I just can't believe that they keep using that name over and over and over. And I mean, I joked the first like 2 times. I was like, wow, is this something we're gonna have to keep tracking? You guys, I did not believe that they were gonna do it 4 times. 4. Once again, we have another case of Nancy Drew just getting everybody's damn near social security number from some random person pretty much. So we get another like name and address and here's exactly where you need to go. So those are kind of like all the little fun little things that I was tracking throughout the book and things that I noticed. And overall, I do have to say I did like this book. I do have to say though, whenever I was kind of giving myself a break, I gave myself like 2 weeks off and then I started reading this book and then I kind of gave myself several more weeks. So it was actually kind of a long span between like when I started and when I finished this book. I kind of wish I would have read this one like all in one go, and I think it would have been a little bit more clear in my mind as far as everything. But this is another one of those stories where it's like we kind of know the villains right off the bat, chasing everybody throughout the whole book, which isn't my favorite type of like plot lines, but I did find this one was really interesting. And we did have another very quick but another international type of style location, and I did really enjoy this one in the end. It was also one of the cases where I feel like we had a good A plot, B plot kind of structure. However, the A plot really kind of was the more like backseat plot, and the B plot was really kind of like the more main focus of the story, but they're of course all tied in and interwoven. And you guys, I don't know what I did with my bingo sheet. I definitely did do a bingo for this book, and I guess I just lost it or something. I'm not sure what I did with it. I know that I didn't get a bingo though, but it was another one of those like really close, like I just needed like 1 or 2 spots. So I'm kind of sad that I lost that bingo sheet, but I will definitely have to find that later. Alright guys, so moving on to the next book. So we are back with book number 58, and this one is called The Flying Saucer Mystery. And this book was published in 1980. So the summary for this one reads, when Nancy and her friends ride deep into the Shawnee Gunk Forest in search of a flying saucer, they find themselves in the middle of more than one mystery. Wildcats, runaway horses, deadly snakes, a disappearing Indian, and a lovable old naturalist in search of treasure hidden by his father years before keep the sleuths tangled in danger and suspense. Finally, during a frightening windstorm, the spacecraft arrives. Nancy and Ned experience an unforgettable journey before they return to solve not one, but 2 spectacular mysteries. Not gonna lie, I kind of feel like the little summary on this one lacks a little bit of like the Nancy Drew pizzazz. I feel like this one actually, like now that I've read the whole story, I feel like it kind of gives a little bit too much away, in my opinion. Alright guys, so for this one, you guys know that I like to track the whole orphan thing, and we do have another orphan in this mystery. I would almost argue we might have 2, but I don't want to spoil anything. So, and then as far as my bingo card, you guys, this was such a dismal bingo for this story. I don't know if I just picked a bad card, but what I really think it came down to was just how different of a Nancy Drew book this one is, and we're gonna get into that. But unfortunately, I did not bingo. I didn't really get that close either. Well, okay, I did need 1 more to bingo on this one, but this card was just not as a near bingo as a lot of my other ones have been. But like I said, I think that kind of goes more towards the story itself. So let's get into the review portion of this. First things first, I have to say I did not know what to expect coming into this Nancy Drew book, because just based on the cover and the title alone, I knew it was going to be a bit more of like a sci-fi themed kind of book. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really a huge sci-fi fan, and especially the few kind of themes we've had in certain Nancy Drew books as like a sci-fi kind of spin on it, they weren't always my favorite. I do have to say this one surprised me in several different ways. So basically Nancy's case has to do with there has been a spotting of a UFO around the area, and for some reason Mr. Drew is on the case and puts Nancy up to it to go investigate. I'm not quite sure what a lawyer would have to do with any of that, where I feel like there's a little bit of like disconnects throughout this story, but that's the setup for it. So Nancy, Bess, George, and the boyfriends all go along to like an extended camping trip where they are trying to spot this flying saucer. So this is another one of those stories that kind of has that like sci-fi, but then like also anti-technology type of like dueling themes, because they are like camping the whole time, they are riding horseback, they are living off the land, and they definitely meet some interesting characters along the way. So first things first, I think we have like probably one of the quickest fat shaming segments ever. I think it's literally on page 2. So the girls are, you know, getting all their gear ready for the camping trip. George says, well, I brought a lot of rain gear and not much else. If it doesn't rain, I'll be out of luck. And then Bess says, if it does, I'll be wetter than a guppy. And George replies, you mean a whale? She literally called her a whale on page 2. Why does anyone like George? Like, Bess is literally just living her damn life, and George just won't quit. So I feel like that has to be the quickest fat shaming segment we've had so far. So one thing that I did notice, the location in the story is called Shawnee Gunk Forest. And so I like to look things up and see like, is this a real place or not? So Shawnee Gunk Forest is not a real place, but there is a Shauna Gunk Forest, and that is located about like the southeastern part of New York State. So I would imagine that that is kind of where this is supposed to be located, I guess. Although I'm not sure why they wouldn't just come out and say that, because it's not like they don't use real life locations. So I'm gonna vaguely say that this one takes place in like lower state New York. So once again, we do have a lot of horses in this story, and ironically, I feel like Nancy always has these weird named horses, but Ned, his horse is named Goalpost, which is very fitting as he is a football player, and Nancy's horse is named Susan B. Now the first thing like that came to mind, I was like, Susan B. Anthony? Is that like what the horse is named after? And you know, she was of course like women's suffrage rights activist and things like that. So I'm like, is that kind of like why they named the horse that? And you know, Ned is goalpost for football, but Nancy, I don't know. Maybe that is a bit of a stretch, but that was the first thing I thought of whenever they said her name was Susan B. Like, the horse's name isn't just Susan, it's Susan B. So a lot of the story does take place in the forest that they are in. They are doing a lot of hiking, horse riding, foraging, fishing. So it's a very kind of like summery, campy kind of story and setting. And so at some point during the story, Nancy and Ned are backtracking to pick up some supplies that they left behind. And they find themselves in a bit of a predicament with a wild animal, but so conveniently there is a naturalist living off the land kind of man, and he is an elderly man nicknamed Old Joe, and he helps Nancy and Ned out of their predicament, and he explains that he's got a mystery that he would like her to help him solve. And they describe this man as like being around the age of 70, which will kind of come back in a few minutes, because there is a big kind of like loophole that I feel like was never closed for me. Maybe I misunderstood something. Either way, we'll get back to it in a minute. So now we've kind of got the whole A plot, B plot, with the A plot being the whole UFO sightings, and then we've also got this mystery from Old Joe that he is trying to find like a missing treasure that his father left for him. Little fun fact, Old Joe has a dog named Trixie, and that is the second time we've had a character named Trixie in the Nancy Drew series. The first time though, it was a little girl in, I can't remember what number, but it was like the Quest of the Missing Map. There was a little girl named Trixie. One thing that kind of frustrated me though throughout the story is that they mentioned that the group has walkie-talkies that they try to use to communicate with each other. However, they only seem to use them like in the first couple chapters, and then we pretty much never hear about it again, which would have been like a really handy thing to use. And whenever they did have them, they would just like not work half the time for no reason other than to just be like a little minor, you know, plot point through the story. So then we also have another introduction of a character who happens to be a Native American man who doesn't speak English, which I thought was kind of a far-fetched thought, because he's supposed to be like one with the earth and lives in the forest and is not civilized, for a lack of a better term. I'm not gonna lie, okay, if it's 1980, I find it a little bit hard to believe that he wouldn't be able to speak English. but he ends up being a very big character throughout the rest of the story in certain ways. But what I didn't like was that when they're kind of like tying these like two things together, they do kind of like very other him in the beginning, where they almost joke like, well, maybe he's an alien because he doesn't speak English, which I thought was kind of bananas. So then of course we have a bit of the sighting of the UFO, and that's what really kind of kickstarts a lot more of like what they're trying to accomplish throughout the mystery, which I feel like there are so many like little minor setbacks that keep Nancy from trying to like achieve her ultimate goal, which just kind of gets very annoying and repetitive. It's like, okay, we're gonna go here. Nope, sorry, we can't because of this. Nope, sorry, we can't because of this. And it's just like these little minor setbacks that keep happening that kind of feel a little bit more frustrating rather than the story like progressing and moving forward. So then finally Nancy gets to hear a little bit of the story, more about the mystery of what old Joe is trying to get her to help him with. And it basically has to do with he and his father went into the forest when they were young, and his father hid something, but he never really knew where it was hidden or what it was, and so he's trying to get Nancy to help uncover that. Now this is like a big plot point for me that I feel like either I misunderstood or something wasn't quite right in this, because he specifically states that he and his father, when he was a young boy, would go into the forest, and that's when his father hid something. But then there's like some timeline discrepancy, because then later Nancy's like uncovering things. She figures out that something was supposed to happen 10 years after that point, but we know that this is like a 70-year-old man, and he said this happened when he was a young boy. So we're talking about like at least 60 years difference, but then the timeline, it just doesn't line up. And I know I'm speaking about this very vaguely, but I'm trying to not spoil anything. But if you guys caught that as well, the whole timeline thing, that just threw me off, and we absolutely never get answers to that or clarification. There's a lot of things actually in this story that we don't get a lot of clarification on. So just to speak vaguely in terms of these, the main things that I had the issues with was the things that happened to Nancy and to Ned separately were pretty crazy, and we never truly get like a real answer as to what happened. Now I have my more scientifically like, this is probably most likely what happened explanation for that particular scenario, but when I was reading it, I was like, what the hell is going on here? And I felt like the pacing of the book was a little bit off. We spend so much time like in the forest and like doing like forest activities and like camping and all, you know, whatever it may be, but then we finally get to the end and it feels like it was so rushed, and like all of the explanations that were given as to all of these like extraterrestrially themed things all get wrapped up pretty quickly, but not with like any type of specificity at all. Like I said, the whole 10-year timeline thing totally didn't line up in my opinion. It just seemed very, very far-fetched. And then once we get to the end, I just felt like it was all wrapped up so quickly, and not even in a good way, because it left me with so many more questions. This one definitely had a very big trip in many ways throughout this book, and it was very, very weird. We also have two kind of random call-outs that we've never gotten before in the Nancy Drew series, and twice throughout the book Nancy makes a reference to the Dana girls, saying like, oh, I need to tell my friends the Dana girls about this. And if you're not familiar, the Dana girls was like another like sister duo investigation Nancy Drew type books that were also produced by Stratmeyer Syndication and ghost written by Carolyn Keene, who is the ghost author of the Nancy Drew series. So this is like, I don't know if we're gonna get more little callouts like this where she's referencing these, but I do know that the Dana sisters books, or the Dana Girls mysteries, the last book from that series was written like, or was published like a year or two before this was published. And honestly, I don't know enough about that series at all, but I just thought it was funny how Nancy calls them out twice, being like, oh, I gotta tell my friends, the Dana Girls, about this and stuff. So I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit. Also, going back to the walkie-talkies, I feel like it would have been really helpful had they used those throughout like the second half of the book, because there was so much like back and forth travel that I think could have been tidied up a little bit had they utilized the walkie-talkies that they have already established that they have. But we just never hear about those again, so. Then at the end we do have like a big kind of like reveal type of thing, which I won't be spoiling, but I want to talk about so bad, because once again I feel like there's like 15 plot holes in the whole kind of like big reveal type of thing. has to do with like the buried treasure and stuff like that. So just know that if this wasn't a no spoilers series, I would definitely be talking all about this because I feel like there's 15 loopholes that just never got closed. And then the final last little point I wanted to mention, now this one, if you do not want even the absolute slightly tiniest bit of a spoiler, skip to this timestamp right here. But if you don't mind and you want to hear, this is actually one of the first, if not only, Nancy Drew mysteries we have read so far that does not have a single villain in it. The whole time I was reading this, I was like, okay, when are we gonna like get a lead on a villain or something? And it just never kept coming. And I was like, is this gonna be another one of those stories where at the end it just comes out of nowhere and they give us a name and then we're done with it? But that actually never happened. Alright, and spoiler over. So overall, you guys, I'm kind of conflicted on what to rank this one. I'm kind of between ranking it a 2 and a 3 since I don't do half points. I think I'm gonna rank it a 3 because even though this was a bit of a weird trip of a book, I did enjoy reading it, and there were so many weird things that happened and went on in this book that it definitely lived up to the sci-fi theme that I figured the book would have. But I definitely think there were a lot of loopholes that just never got closed and kind of was an example of a little bit of some sloppy writing that really could have easily been, you know, nicely sewn up and stuff. But I will give this one a 3 because I did actually enjoy this book, and I feel like even though 3 is a little bit, you know, ranking it above average, I think that 2 just seemed a little bit too low to rank this one. So I did enjoy it. It was another really weird, atypical Nancy Drew book, so just keep that in mind when you're getting into this one. Put your preconceived notions aside because this one was just one of the most different feeling Nancy Drew books that I have read so far compared to like the rest of the books in the series. Alright guys, so we're going to be moving on to the third and last book for this video. Right, and we are on to the last book for this video. This is book number 59, The Secret in the Old Lace. This one was published in 1980. So the summary of this one reads, strange things start to happen when Nancy enters a magazine contest with a solution to a true mystery. A century ago, an elegant Belgian gentleman, a secret pair of lace cuffs, and a priceless treasure all disappeared. Suddenly, Nancy's contest entry is missing. A day later, when another contestant submits the identical solution, Nancy sees there's a real mystery to be solved. Nancy, Bess, and George fly to Belgium in search of the truth. In a chilling adventure through hidden rooms, dark tunnels, and ghostly canals, the young sleuths get caught up in a romantic mystery of the past. Alright guys, so for this one, we did have a really good bingo sheet for this one. It's been a while since I've had this many bingos on one sheet, but you guys, I really killed this one. I had 1, 2, 3, 4-way bingo, and then I was so close to a 5th and a 6th bingo and a 7th if you count all 4 corners. So I had a really good run on this one. I just got like the perfect card for this one apparently, and it was nice to have a mega bingo on this one. So starting off on this one, we did not have any orphans per se for this one. And as far as what I ranked this book, I actually gave this one 4 stars. Now, if you have read this book or if you've read a whole bunch of reviews on this one, I feel like a lot of people didn't necessarily like this one as much, but for me, it was absolutely like right up there with the types of stories that I like. We once again have an international mystery. I really do love those quite a bit. And I specifically love the European ones. I've just always really loved a lot of like European culture and history, and this one was really interesting because it takes place mainly in Belgium, and I've actually never been to Belgium. While I was reading, it felt very familiar to me as far as like having been to other European cities before, and it even mentions that it's kind of like the Venice of the North. And whenever I was reading this, I was like, okay, I don't have much of a mental idea of what Belgium looks like, so I actually went on to Google Street View and was looking up where they are at in Bruges, and it just really like brought the whole story together for me, like actually being able to picture all these little locations that they're going to, and it just had a very like cozy romantic kind of vibe to it, especially with the kind of dueling mysteries that Nancy is solving in this book. So of course, like the summary mentioned, it's starting out with with Nancy is entering a magazine contest, and they give you like a little excerpt of a mystery that has never been solved, and then the readers are supposed to write in what they think the mystery is or what happened to the mystery. But she really goes through hell and high water to get her contest entry entered after it disappears. And of course, in the ever-present coincidence we have through Nancy Drew books, not only is she providing a fictional answer to the mystery, but Bess's mother, friend from college, Madame Chambray, writes a letter to her inviting the girls to come solve a mystery of her own. Of course, it takes place in none other than Belgium. We do get another really quick kind of Aunt Eloise cameo with this one. I always really like whenever Nancy goes to visit her Aunt Eloise and works it into, even if it's just like a quick little visit, which was the case in this book, but I always really love, I don't know, I just love Aunt Eloise so much. We do have a few strange occurrences, of course, like break-ins. You know, we see that a lot throughout Nancy Drew, but there was one scene that kind of made me laugh in this one, because at one point Nancy and Ned are jumped by a gang of street kids and stuff, and that one was pretty different. We haven't seen that too often in the Nancy Drew series, but that whole scene was kind of a little bit humorous in my opinion, but wasn't supposed to be. One thing that I thought was weird though is that whenever they finally get to Brussels, to the airport, Nancy is like asking the airport attendant or the terminal agent or whatever, she's asking him if he speaks English, and I thought that was strange because Nancy speaks fluent French. So I thought it was strange that Nancy was like asking the officer if he knows English when she could have easily communicated with him through French. This was like a random little thought that I had while I was reading the book as well. I remember in a specific block of Nancy Drew books, it was around like the ski jump mystery, Velvet Mask, the hidden window mystery, around that block of books. It was kind of like they'd give you an indication of what time of year the book was taking place in. Like it might be something really vague like early April or late June or something like that, but I kind of miss when we would get those little date indicators as far as like what time of year it is in the mysteries. So that was just a random thought that I had while I was reading this one, and it just kind of seems like it's perpetually summer in Nancy Drew land, so I always kind of liked the ones where we got a little bit of a hint of what time of year the story is taking place in. One other note that I had, I put, wow, I guess George doesn't have enough things to make fun of Bess for, because when she's not making fun of her weight, she's also making fun of her for being girly and romantic and for wearing makeup and things like that. And George even says, why wear rouge at all when you know I can keep your blood pressure sky high? Just another reason why I feel like George is not a very likable character at all. So the girls finally get to Madame Chambray's house, and she fills in the girls when they get there that she has done like one of the stupidest things ever, and to not spoil it, basically let's just say that she makes her mystery known in a very public way and pretty much like blows Nancy's cover. And I really hate whenever the characters are so dumb like that, because why would you tell the whole town everything they need to know to swindle you? It just is like one of those big pet peeve of mine, is when characters are just insanely dumb to the point of no return. And another thing I really loved is like kind of the old house that Madame Chambray is living in and how it ties in with the mystery. I felt like I could really picture the house really well with like all the old kind of like creepy nooks and crannies in there. There's even a cellar that connects to like the canal, kind of like in Venice. If you have a boat, you can actually drive your boat into the canal and connect to your house, which I thought was kind of an interesting like thing you don't see every day. And whenever they made the connection of it's like Venice of the North, I was like, oh, okay, that gives me a really good like indication of like what this setting looks like. We do learn a lot of really cool interesting things, like how lace is made, which I'm not gonna lie, I had no idea how lace was made before I read this book, and reading the description of it made me want to learn more. So I actually went onto YouTube to see how lace is made, and my mind is kind of blown whenever I was watching this video, because it's such a tedious art form. It would blow my mind trying to make something like that. So I do have to say this book actually gave me a really big appreciation for lace, especially handmade lace. Of course, machine-made lace is still beautiful and delicate and very tedious in and of itself, but to do it by hand was just absolutely incredible to see. So that was something that I just never knew about and never thought thought about until I read this book. So I thought that was a really cool little point of something that I learned from this book. Once again, we have another fat joke from George. While the girls are searching the house for something, Bess doesn't want to go down into a specific place because she had a bad experience there, so she wants to stay up on the main floor of the house, around the kitchen area or so, and George says, "You just want to be near the refrigerator." Reason number 557 why George is an asshole. They weren't even talking about food or anything, and she just like brought that up. Like, sometimes Bess is like, "Oh, I just love chocolate sundaes, I could eat 100 of them," or something like that. And George is like, "Yeah, I bet you could, you dumb big whale." But this, like, they weren't even talking about food or anything, and she still just like had to make a low blow at her. Although I give props to Bess because she was very brave and she makes a really big discovery in this mystery, and I'm always so proud when Bess gets her glory. So overall, I really did like this book and I thought it was really great, but one big point of contention I have, and I will keep this very vague as to not ruin anything, but there is one point they are searching for something and they get a pretty straightforward clue that tells them exactly where they need to go look for this something. And whenever they get there, they start looking for this something and they run into a bump in the road that delays them from searching further. So they end up diverting their attention to something else, and then miraculously they find the treasure in a completely different place than where they were specifically told to look for. So that was the one thing that really kind of confused me as to why it was like, it's right here. Oh no, we can't look now. Let's go look somewhere else. And then they find it anywhere. It's like, what was the point of that original spot that you were looking at then? So I feel like that was a really huge kind of like plot hole that was never quite really resolved, because it kept leading us to believe, oh, once we get past this hurdle, we'll come back to this place and everything will be resolved. And then it really wasn't at all. We also have another case of like several villains all working together that have several aliases throughout the story. So it feels like there's a lot more characters than there are because there are so many different aliases that people have. And then there's another plot point that I just feel like never really got resolved for me, and there's kind of no way around me to like talk about it without spoiling it, but it has to do with like, why does a undiscovered treasure exist in the first place, knowing the situation of certain characters? It's like, why was this unknown to another character in the first place? So I know that's pretty vague, but I do try to keep these all spoiler free. So if you've read the book, you might know kind of what I'm hinting at. But yeah, that was the one thing. I'm like, well, why is there even a treasure to begin with? We also have a very slight introduction of a character who's helpful throughout the book, but she's just got like a serious jealousy problem for like no reason right off the bat. And then she's like nice the rest of the way through. So I don't know. The character Hilda, it kind of seemed like she was very jealous of Bess or George being interested in the guy that she likes, but the second she learns that they all have boyfriends, she's like sweet as a daisy. So kind of like a strange little random plot point that I don't really think furthered the story at all, but it was just a strange one. So overall though, I did give this one 4 stars. I really did enjoy the setting of this story, the romantic kind of nature to it, and especially coming off the flying saucer mystery and the triple hoax, I felt like this one just kind of felt a lot more like the original Nancy Drew books. I felt like there was a slight shift in the triple hoax as like feeling a little bit different moving from the new publisher, but I've definitely felt like the flying saucer mystery was totally like a different vibe and feeling than the traditional Nancy Drew books. So this one so far has actually felt like the most like part of the originals out of the 3 that I've read in the new part of the series. But overall, that's pretty much all of my thoughts so far for these first 3 books. I will be continuing reading on the next 3 and bringing some more no spoiler reviews to you guys. So I really hope that you guys are still enjoying these videos. And I also want to say a big thank you to everybody for giving me the time that I needed to refresh myself and not get burnt out on reading these on such a quick turnaround time to do these video reviews weekly. I did end up taking a little bit of a longer break than I anticipated, but at the end of the day, I am really invigorated to get back into reading these and reviewing them, and I just kind of needed the summer off to kind of let my brain relax just a little bit when it came to stressing on reading these books and stuff. So we are back, and I do hope to stay on a very steady, consistent schedule from here on out, but you know, if I need to take a break every once in a while, I will do that just so I don't burn myself out, because it's pretty easy to do. Alright guys, so that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Links are below. And until my next video, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.